everyone? Can everyone hear me now? Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining this panel today. My name is Eliza from Ground Truth Solutions, and we talk with thousands of people affected by crisis every year who share with us their feedback on humanitarian assistance and also what they ask from organizations to better support them to prepare, prevent, and recover from crisis. We wanted to have a conversation today specifically on anticipatory action because this is what we've been asking communities about this year in Chad and Nigeria. Over the last week, in every single session I've heard at COP, there has really been this huge ask to better address community needs and priorities because the climate crisis is really having devastating impacts on people's lives and livelihoods, and the support that people are receiving is still not enough. At Ground Truth Solutions, this year we spoke to communities in Chad and Nigeria who are experiencing devastating floods almost every year. And one of the key things that they told us is that they need better support on anticipatory action and increased investment in early warning. This is absolutely critical. We've spoken a lot about the need to move to more proactive responses to crisis. This is common sense, and this also came out very strongly from the communities that we spoke to. You could not imagine the amount of people who said to us, we have a saying that says prevention is better than the cure. This is a universal saying, and we encounter it over and over and over again. And people are already responding ahead of crisis. They have structures in place. They are doing what they can with the means that they have to respond ahead of a crisis. They are mobilizing together to build flood barriers, to collect sandbags, to come together to really try and minimize the impacts as much as possible. And when we spoke to them about anticipatory action and what those programs are trying to achieve, people did mention that this is absolutely essential to help strengthen existing systems, to ensure that people have more resources to act quickly ahead of a flood after an early warning has been issued. People also have their own forecasting methods, like based on local and traditional knowledge, but they need better access to meteorological data in order to help triangulate that information and ensure that people can act earlier than they do now. However, they also mentioned a large number of challenges, including that anticipatory action programs in the way that they're currently designed still focus primarily on short-term measures to very long-term issues and have really brought forward the critical importance of investing in resilience and adaptation solutions in order to make anticipatory action more effective. And so today, in order to really talk about how we can better address community needs, we brought together a panel of organizations doing this incredible work to see how this can be done practically and some of the experiences that organizations are seeing while they try and do this. So before I open up the conversation, I would like to introduce our brilliant panel here today. So sitting next to me, we have Loretta Heber-Jurade, who is the Chief of Risk Knowledge, Monitoring, and Capacity Development at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And then we have Tom Nientier, the Senior Manager at Give Directly. We also have Lutfor Rahman, who is a Project Officer at the International Center for Climate Change and Development. And we also have Adesu Kasivi, who is the Africa lead at the Global Network for Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we also have Priska Chisala, who is the Director of Programs at the Malawi Red Cross. And thank you so much for participating with us today and to have this conversation on how we can better address community needs. And this is meant to be an informal discussion where we can really be honest and we can be bold. So I urge you all to just speak your mind and so we can share all these different things together. I would like to start with Adesu from GNDR. So like I mentioned before, we heard a lot from people in Chad and Nigeria about how anticipatory action needs to come with increased investment in development, in adaptation, and resilience solutions. Does this resonate with your own experience in your own work? And how do you see anticipatory action being better embedded in these more long-term programs? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elisa. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Thank you. It's my pleasure really to join this event today, especially as we are talking about Nigeria and Chad, which are two countries in my region. So it's something I'm very well aware about, and I'm really happy to share my experience. Only when we talk about anticipatory action, we talk about pre-positioned funds that are there waiting for any event to happen. Once it's happened, then that fund is like allocated to support. You know, I like comparing the anticipatory fund, which I completely advocate for and I support as insurance resources. Insurance are not always helpful, especially when you are coming from developing countries where you may not have sufficient food on daily basis, and keeping a money waiting for something to happen before you allocate that money, or pre-positioning fund. And when people are hungry, when people are dying of different diseases, it's quite complex. It's very difficult, you know. And though anticipatory action is extremely important because it contributes to reduce the severity of the hazard that tend to become disaster on communities. It's important to balance the way we do anticipatory action. But what we are seeing, and coming to Nigeria and Chad that you mentioned, my understanding is anticipatory action is simply has not yet reached its main goal for the simple reason that, as you say, it's on a short-term program. You put money for a year, but people, you know, we are talking about complex disaster situation, meaning that people are really dealing with different challenges. Okay, seems thank you. So people are really dealing with different challenges that include poverty, hunger, you know, diseases. So I think for the anticipatory action to be effective, efficient, and sustainable enough, it's really important to go beyond the concept itself and integrate in a very significant manner the development dimension. You know, early warning that we mentioned, it's very useful, but if the early warning, if the information you provide is not understood by the communities, if the information you provide is not accessible in a timely manner, if the information you provide is not owned because local communities understand themselves, they understand the information but find themselves in the information, that information might not be very useful for them. They will not trust the information, and therefore they will not act, at least not in timely manner. But to do this, you need to, you need to open the floor somehow by, first of all, ensuring that these people are living in a very resilient place, which is a development dimension. And this I think this needs to be understood, especially by the humanitarian actors. Sorry to mention that way, but the way the anticipatory action is managed today is more humanitarian dimension, which is like a post-event, a post-disaster response rather than a development response. But without the development, without ensuring that the communities who are there are resilient enough to cope with the hazard and to reduce their likelihood to become a disaster, probably your humanitarian or anticipatory action itself will not have the effective impact you expect, because it's a short-term issue. And especially coming to a zone, because we are talking again about Nigeria and Chad, where we have conflict, where we have different crises on the ground, disaster is just another events added to the current and the already existing event. So it's important to find a way to mainstream the management of all this challenge in a way that communities do not wait only for the hazard to become disaster, but are sufficiently equipped intellectually, materially, physically, to cope with any hazard, because again, you may agree with me, hazards are increasing in number and in severity. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your excellent points, and this really resonates with the feedback that we received from communities as well. I mean, we're talking about communities that are facing crisis after crisis every single year, and not only when it meets the trigger for response by humanitarians or by others. And so they really said that it is absolutely critical to help them and to better equip them with the ability to respond to every single crisis that they're facing. And I would just like to point out as well, something that I forgot to mention at the beginning that I really should have, is that we did our research in Chad in a place in the province of Adjalamis in Mani. Mani, we spoke to people in August and in October. They have told us consistently that they are worried about the impacts of flooding on their community because they know that the impacts will be really terrible this year, mostly because of the food insecurity crisis, which has left families completely depleted of food. There is also an economic crisis, which has left families more impoverished, and they know that it will be a lot harder to recover from floods this year than it was back in 2022 when Chad faced one of the biggest floods they've ever faced. We heard yesterday that 5,000 people in Mani were displaced recently because of the floods and the impact of conflict, and yet they have been raising the alarm for months and for years that they need the support. And it is true that anticipatory action without these broader investments, like you mentioned, is absolutely essential in order to really support these communities in the way that they need. So thank you very much. I would like now to pass on to Lutfor to share about the context in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is often cited as a case study for really exemplary work on how anticipatory action can really support communities. And it would be really great to hear from you how anticipatory action is working in Bangladesh and how well is it delivering for communities there. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank you here for listening to me. So I am from Bangladesh. So my name is Lutfur Rahman, and I'm from the International Center for Climate Change and Development. It's under the independent university based in Bangladesh. So I am basically from the research backgrounds here. So basically, in the main reasons of here, so I would like to introduce of my research. So when we're talking about the humanitarian assistance, it's all about the addressing the loss and damage. So in the context in Bangladesh, so there are so many kinds of extreme events and also the slow onset events. But in extreme events like the flood, cyclone, or the river erosion, so there is a different context, and the people from the different contexts are impacted by the different types of loss and damages. That's include economic and also non-economic. So we have found that the people who are losses they are impacted by the river erosion are different from the losses from the floods, and also floods people who are affected by the floods are also different from the cyclones and the storm surge. So there is a different intensity and the different losses they have faced, and even the people who are lost their lands and everything in the river erosion or the coastal erosion, and they don't have the chance to go back their origin. So they need a support, different support from the people who are affected by the flood, because flood you also affected, but you can go back there. And also people who are impacted by the drought, they are different from the people who are impacted by the climate change and also the coastal surge. And also when we're talking about the humanitarian assistance, we need to consider also gender diversity. So if the people of the men with disability and the women with disability, and also the people, the younger people, they don't have the knowledge to capacitate themselves. So it's really considered when we are talking about the humanitarian assistance to the community. But we have the problems, but we have also the solutions. So when we're talking about the solutions, so I will likely mention in our government part, also NGOs part, and also the humanitarian organizations sort of working in there, the Bangladesh Red Crescent and Red Cross Society. So they have the around 70,000 volunteers. So in the vulnerable 20 countries, we are the leaders. Bangladesh are the leaders in the early warning system, because in the cyclone system, we have the track record on the reducing the livelihood losses in the cyclone. But we are also lag behind from the floods, although also the coastal surge, also the river erosion. But in our government also, give the assistance to the river people who loses their lands and homes, and the government have the projects to settle them or give them the housing to homeless people. And also we have the NGO organization. It's called BRAC. BRAC is an international organization, and they support one of their program that is Climate Bridge Fund. They actually give the funds to the informal settlements or the slum area people where the people are displaced people or climate change impact people are live in their area. So in that fund, they are around 70%, around 70 to 60% fund goes to that kinds of people. They are supported by them. So when we're talking about this, all of the solutions, so we have the problem. So in the research sector, we have also found that the people are asking for the pre-positioning finance or the forecast-based finance. So it goes to initially for 2 or 3 days before the action happened. If when we are going to the area, the disaster happened, then we can assess the what type of losses happened, and then if we want to thus quantify, then we have to exclude some of these things because they lost many things, so many things. So what do you consider? So that's why it's better to pre-financing before the disaster they can happen. And also we have to translate the modeling or translate the scientific knowledge or complex knowledge to understandable for the communities that our colleague already mentioned. So that's where research organization also working in the capacity building in the localized. So how can humanitarian assistance goes to the localized and help the people, because there is some of the bureaucratic problems, also the corruption, so the fund not goes to the community level. And also the community who are working in there, so we make the leadership. So we build the leadership. So one of the program we are running with the Red Crescent and Red Cross Climate Center with the South Africa Center, and we are the co-lead from the Asia Pacific. So how the people who are working actually in the community level, in the local level, in the national level, how they can actually conduct any decision or conduct any workshop more interactive way and translated their scientific knowledge in understandable for the community. Then they can assist and they can also reduce their humanitarian impacts. So thank you. I will step there.
Thank you so much for sharing about Bangladesh. I think it's really interesting to see that even in a context like Bangladesh, where you have a lot of institutional support, that there are still challenges that need to be addressed to really meaningfully meet the needs of communities. And so my next question is for Loretta. So now, after we've heard the example from Bangladesh about how you need different partners to work together in order to make anticipatory action successful, how do you think that could work in more complex settings, like we were talking before with Chad and Nigeria, that maybe do not have that institutional setup? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting UNDRR, and let me just take a moment to appreciate the work of Ground Truth, because it's really important to listen to the views of communities, to the people whose lives are at risk from climate change, and we often do not do that enough, I think. So let me just say a little bit about some of the challenges of working in fragile contexts with early warning and with anticipatory action. One of the challenges we're seeing is the lack of data and forecasting gaps. So over the course of the last several weeks, we've been working in Sudan at how to scale up early warning as part of the Early Warnings for All initiative, and noting that the meteorological system has been largely brought to a halt, although there are really heroic efforts being made to keep forecasting underway. In Yemen, we have seen something similar where the ongoing conflict has disrupted the meteorological infrastructure. So this is making it difficult to predict floods or droughts accurately. Obviously, access and security constraints are a problem. In northern Nigeria, anticipatory actions like pre-positioning food has been impacted, obviously, by violence caused by the Boko Haram. We are seeing weak governance and institutional capacity that is making it difficult. So, for example, in South Sudan, flood forecasting has improved. However, the lack of coordination between the relevant ministries and agencies has delayed effective anticipatory action responses, at least to the extent that one would like to see. And something I have experienced often in my career is that there are competing crises and priorities in conflict-affected countries. They have overlapping crises, as we've heard before: conflict, displacement, food insecurity. So this can complicate the prioritization of anticipatory action. For example, in Somalia, the drought early warnings sometimes have been taking a backseat when conflict-driven displacement or even locust outbreaks demand immediate attention. And the other issue we see in fragile contexts is a challenge with community trust and awareness. So, for example, in Syria, anticipatory actions during extreme weather events sometimes faced resistance due to the mistrust and the limited understanding of the risks. So what are some of the actions that we are seeing that can be leveraged, I would say, to increase the anticipatory action? First, we think it's really important to leverage the local networks and really work more at a local level. So, for example, in Afghanistan, NGOs with local ties have been very instrumental in delivering cash-based anticipatory aid. And we think we can invest more in low-cost solutions, investable in scalable solutions as well, such as mobile cash transfers, early warning via SMS. So in the Sahel, mobile anticipatory cash programs have been successful. More flexible funding mechanisms as well. And also there's a need to focus on integrated risks. It's not enough to look at extreme weather in a context where conflict is also present. How do we understand these risks more holistically? Early warning was mentioned before, so let me just say a word about how the Early Warnings for All initiative, which is co-led by UNDRR, is looking to scale up in fragile contexts. Because as you are aware, the fourth pillar of early warning is around early action and anticipatory action, led by the Red Cross. And what we see as a risk moving forward with this initiative to protect all people with early warning systems by 2027 is that fragile contexts will be left behind. We really do need to double down on our efforts, and to that end, we have just released a handbook on scaling up early warning in fragile, conflict, and violent affected settings, recognizing that the systems that are being deployed in other parts of the world may not be adaptable in fragile contexts, and that we need to work with other institutions, work with humanitarian partners, work with sometimes non-state actors even, to ensure that all people receive early warnings. And so there will be a real concentrated effort this year on scaling up early warning. That includes anticipatory action in fragile context, starting in Africa, as a matter of fact. But maybe a final point from me, and I think the point has been made, but I'd like to reiterate it. If we want to get a handle on the climate emergency, we cannot wait until emergencies strike. Early warnings, anticipatory action is already pretty far down the chain. We really need to build resilience. And for this, we need to focus not only on hazards, but this is a climate change conference, so it's normal that there's a lot of focus on hazards. But really, we need to get at the heart of the challenge of vulnerability reduction. And in fragile contexts, what we see is compounded vulnerability. Vulnerability from shocks and stresses due to conflict or violence that are being exacerbated by extreme weather caused by climate change. So from UNDRR's perspective, we really have to keep vulnerability reduction at the heart of all of our efforts in fragile but also non-fragile countries, because it's across the world. It's these populations that are the most disenfranchised, whether they're in a fragile or non-fragile context, that suffer the most from extreme weather events. So I think I'd leave it there, Lisa, but thank you very much for the question.
Thank you so much for your reflections and for your incredibly important points that you made. I think the last point you mentioned on vulnerability reduction is so critical. Like I mentioned earlier, at Ground Truth, we speak to thousands of people every year. We've been working for over 10 years now, and I cannot stress enough how much we hear in every single context we work in, no matter where it is, that people really want this to be addressed, for vulnerability to be reduced, and for resilience to be increased, and we hear it all the time. It is the most common feedback we receive, so I really cannot stress that enough. And I would also like to quickly say thank you for mentioning the case of Afghanistan. At Ground Truth, we've been doing research in Afghanistan and talking to people affected by crisis there. And actually, we recently, in our latest research, people told us that there is a desperate need for early warning and a desperate need to help people cope with the impacts of disasters in Afghanistan. And with people being displaced and on the move because of the current ongoing issues in Afghanistan, they are not getting that support. And so I would really like to highlight the feedback that we've received from Afghanistan on that. So thank you very much for your reflections, very important. I would like now to pass on to Tom from Give Directly. Give Directly has been doing such incredible work to support communities whose lives and livelihoods have been devastated by climate shocks. And I would like to hear a bit more from you on what you've learned on how to get the timing of the support right. And also another question I have for you, which is earlier always better? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elisa, and a real privilege to be here with this distinguished panel and speaking to all of you. At Give Directly, we have been working with Google.org and Google research teams, working with satellite data to model flooding. That gives us insights into which areas are vulnerable to flooding, and where can we pre-position infrastructure that will allow us to be able to respond with cash transfers in advance. So being able to identify potential people that are going to be potentially be affected by the flooding, and then also to be able to provide them with equipment that allows us to deliver cash. So we deliver cash using mobile phones. We also work using data from early warning systems and AI to help us to trigger and deliver cash rapidly once we have line of sight of when a disaster is going to occur. With these two sets of data, we know where to be and we know how to deliver cash. And we've had programs that have delivered anticipatory action cash in 3 countries, Mozambique, Bangladesh, and in Nigeria. Coming to your question, is earlier always better? I think I want to concur with the panel in terms of actually it would be better if we were able to deliver assistance much earlier to reduce vulnerability and to increase resilience, in which case people are able to build and to be prepared already. That being said, the realities of uncertainty, the realities of inadequate funding to be able to reach everybody that is potentially at risk. How do we now build systems that allow us to get to the right places at the right time? We have an experience, I'll talk about two cases. An experience where we, using all this data, all this infrastructure, we identified a community that was at risk, that we anticipated during the tropical cyclone Freddy in Mozambique was going to be impacted by flooding. We gave them mobile phones, we were ready to deliver the cash. 3 days before, we dispersed the cash. The cyclone came, the path changed, and it hit a village that we had not prepositioned. So the tragedy is we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The reality is, even in the village where we were expecting the floods to occur, people were desperately poor, and the support that they received actually helped them to actually address some of the needs that had been identified to say already existing even without a disaster. That being said, our experience has shown that when we deliver the cash in advance, even in an anticipatory, people are able to safeguard their assets, and they're able also to build proactively their resilience. And what this does is helps them to be able to reduce the impact of the disaster, but more importantly, from a livelihood productivity perspective, it also helps them to get back to their feet much more quickly, get back to work much more quickly, get back to business much more quickly. And therefore, with respect to is earlier always better, I'm saying earlier is good, but it's not enough. So the way that we design our programs is we deliver part of the cash transfer in advance, and then we also deliver another portion after the disaster, because it's not always possible to predict the severity of loss that we expect to see, and it's also not always easy for recipients to predict what they need to do in order to be able to withstand the shock. So having a design that allows them to take proactive measures in as far as their knowledge and experience allows them to do, but also giving them cash immediately after helps them to fully address the loss. And this is important because then we are actually making sure that we are giving them the best possible opportunity to be able to recover and continue their lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your reflections. And I would like to briefly go on your point of needing to provide cash before and after. This is also resonates with the feedback that we got from Nigeria. So in Nigeria, with FACT Foundation, we interviewed people who had received anticipatory cash assistance ahead of the floods in 2023 in northeast Nigeria. And one of the things that they said to us was that it would have been better, like you said, to receive some cash ahead of time and some cash right after, because they were also coping with a huge inflation issue. And so when they received the cash, it was actually shared with everyone first. So whoever received anticipatory cash, they shared it with their neighbors, they shared it with their friends, they shared it with their families to help people, be able to act ahead of time. And the same thing happened when they received cash right after. So that cash was shared and they were able to mobilize together. But this was only possible through having cash before and right after. And this was also a point that they made repeatedly, which is, providing a little bit of cash right before is fine and it's helpful, but it would be a lot more helpful if we had it more regularly and we were able to really use it for what we need it for, which is to reduce the impacts of floods while also being able to address our immediate needs. I think, one of the things they said is, when you have families that are struggling to even buy food, if they receive cash, they're going to use it to buy food first and they're going to share it so that people can eat first. And only if there's some left over will they invest it in the precautionary measures that they need. I mean, someone said they received cash but then couldn't afford to evacuate, which, it kind of defeats the purpose of anticipatory action. So I would really like to highlight that point again, how important it is to make sure that there is follow-up after, anticipatory action programs are activated. So thank you so much for that. Last but not least, I would like to pass on now to Priska. Malawi Red Cross, of course, is doing also a lot of work directly with communities on anticipatory action. And I would love to hear what are some of the practical steps that you're taking to make sure that anticipatory action is more responsive to community needs and preferences. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be part of this interesting conversation around anticipatory actions, which is one of the institutional priority issues for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, as stipulated in the number of strategic documents that we have, such as the IFRC Strategy 2030, the Global Climate Resilience Program, but also Plan and Budget 2021-2025, among other documents. And I want to acknowledge already the fact that with the great panelists that we have here, we are all using anticipatory action as a terminology for the discussion at hand. I would want to say for us in the Red Cross, we use anticipatory actions and early warning actions interchangeably, of course, knowing for sure that the anticipatory actions are going to be associated with an element of pre-financed agreements. So going back to Malawi Red Cross Society, we've done quite a lot around anticipatory actions or early actions. And from the practical experience that we've had on the ground, one thing that we have noted is that when we want to have effective or at least anticipatory actions that are producing the required results, we need to make sure that there is adequate community engagement and accountability. So we need to engage the people that we are dealing with. So instead of developing I'll start with the early warning systems, which by the end of the day are going to guide the anticipatory actions and the early actions that we want to talk about. We need to have people-centered anticipatory actions, people-centered early actions, where we are saying, let's not dictate the actions for the people that we're working with. Let us not develop for them, but rather let's develop with them. So let us have them as part and parcel of defining exactly what we want to do And we begin with supporting the communities to kind of understand the risks that we are trying to address, the hazards, and even when we are trying to look at how are we going to monitor whatever hazards have been predicted, they need to be part and parcel, but also we make sure that we don't ignore the indigenous knowledge that they have, because we know they have been on the ground. They know their communities better than us. So we want to leverage on the indigenous knowledge that they have, and our role is to support or at least build on that indigenous knowledge to make sure that we at least combine the indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge that is coming from the meteorological department. But also we need to recognize the fact that there are also structures already on the ground that are also dealing with so many of these issues that we're talking about. So we cannot ignore them 100% and start bringing in new things altogether. We need to also do an analysis of what are the already existing related structures. For example, we have noted there are already like early warning systems in the communities, which comprise of a group of the communities themselves. So when we just go there and understand the capacities they have already and the gaps they have, they are going to own the whole thing. And when we bring in advisories, when we bring in the activities they are going to own them. And by the end of the day, the early warnings that we're giving to them are going to be acted upon. And this is from evidence from what we have done on the ground. And I would want to also share here that I wanted to somehow agree with the previous speakers that had sort of recommended the need not to look at anticipatory actions as a standalone interventions, but rather build them as part of existing or other resilience building activities. We had a study in Malawi when we had, after we experienced a very devastating floods from tropical cyclone some 2 years ago, where afterwards we did a comparative study just to make sure to kind of follow up in terms of the uptake amongst the affected populations on the early warning messages that we had given. And what we noted is in the communities where we already had engaged them on anticipatory actions, early warning things, the uptake, the reception to the messages was much more greater than where we were going there for the very first time. They had not been exposed to such kind of advisories. So what we have noted is that, again, I'm going back to the issue of the need to continuously engage with the communities, not only when we are anticipating a disaster, but if we are building anticipatory actions as part of the already existing activities, it means we're already in touch with the people. We're not only doing them with this sort of one sort of activity, and also that also helps in terms of building the trust, so that by the time we are bringing in messages around anticipatory actions, the uptake is going to be improved. So these are some of the examples that we have learned based on our experiences working with communities in Malawi. And another thing that I also wanted to share here is I think we've also learned that it's really important to be in a state of readiness around the entire plans, if it means resources, prepositioning non-food items in strategic places, having pre-financed agreement arrangements, where, for example, in the Red Cross, we have a mechanism which we call DREF that also has a component that would kind of preposition already stock and would support the national societies to already develop like early action protocols so that when a trigger has been activated, then you would be able to receive the funding. So such kind of mechanisms are also very relevant for us to sort of have timely anticipatory actions, which by the end of the day would be effective. I think these are some of the things that I thought I could share as a panelist. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I completely agree with you, the need to make sure that everything we're doing is people-centered, and to recognize as well that communities have knowledge and experience to share. This is really one of the biggest findings that we had when we worked in Chad. I wanted to also point out the partners that helped us do this, which is the Centre de Recherche en Anthropologie et Sciences Humaines, who are absolutely critical to allowing us to do this work. That's what people shared with us. They have systems in place. They've been doing this for years. This may be a new type of humanitarian programming, but is absolutely not new for communities. They have been mobilizing for years. They also trigger responses based on early warnings, using community funds, or having people donating their time and their resources to make this possible. And so when we're trying to figure out how best to operate and how best to ensure that anticipatory action programs can have the potential that they need to have, asking people first who've been doing this for a long time is absolutely, absolutely critical. So I fully agree with you, and thank you so much for sharing what has been going on at the Malawi Red Cross. It's really incredible to hear how you are engaging with communities. And as you said, community engagement and accountability are absolutely the foundation to effective anticipatory action. Before I go to all panelists for their final advocacy points, I would just like to ask the audience if there were any questions for any of the panelists. Sure.
Thank you so much. It's really a great panel, and my name is Azmat Khan, and I'm working with the local NGO FRD in Pakistan. Just to bring this new perspective of anticipatory action from the Pakistan perspective. One issue is with setting the triggers, specifically talking about the heat waves sort of thing. We have different climate zones within our country, and in some regions, like having a temperature of 42 or 45 degrees Celsius is quite common. But then there are other areas where the people are not used to heat, and just above 35 is too much for them. But in the anticipatory action, they generally go for having the same trigger for the entire country. So for those people who previously didn't had this heat and now they are facing heat, so even if temperature goes beyond 37, 38 degrees Celsius, it is unbearable for them. But they have to wait to reach to that threshold. Then there is lack of data on certain things, like on riverine floods. We are quite good, and this modeling and this trigger is quite we are good with that. But with the flash floods, the data is sort of missing, and they couldn't come up with a flash floods trigger, like how they are going. And yes, I'm agreeing with Adisu's point from GNDR that the anticipatory action, as it is practiced now, it seems more like a post-event relief phase rather than the resilience of the community. So we have to go a long way on the anticipatory action, but still we have started taking the steps. The steps might be baby steps, but the steps seem to be in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to respond? Lori?
Yes, thank you. You raise an excellent point, especially about extreme heat. I mean, of all the extreme weather events, we've seen a decrease in mortality because of better preparedness and early warning. The exception is extreme heat. But we should be very careful. You cannot set a national trigger for extreme heat because it's very context specific. It's not only the temperature, it's also how humid is it? What is the duration of the heat event? What is the characteristics of the population? Is it urban? Is it rural? So it really does need to be very, very context specific when it comes to extreme heat. We are doing a lot of work in this area now. It's become really a priority because of the increased mortality. One of the things I know from Pakistan, having just met with the National Disaster Management Authorities just this morning, is that you are relying more on seasonal forecast, a 6-month seasonal forecast to underpin some of your anticipatory action activities. So that's good news. So you'll have a sense of whether or not you're expecting, for example, torrential rains, which could lead to flash floods. You have to keep investing in the modeling, keep investing in the data, but also please do not use one size fits all, because it really depends so much on the characteristics of the specific location about how an extreme weather event will impact, and therefore which triggers. And the triggers need to be also adapted on a regular basis, depending on what we heard about Chad, for example. What is the condition of the population? They're suffering from extreme inflation. Then you need to take that into account as well. So thank you for the question. They're very pertinent. I don't know if other colleagues would like to add.
Thank you so much. Is there another question from the audience?
My name's Dee. I work with Trocra, that's Caritas Ireland. We did an initiative across 3 countries around pre-positioning funding with local organisations, and one thing we found was that it gave them a huge amount of voice and influence around preparedness and response because they'd money in their pockets at the decision-making table in advance of a crisis. And I'm just wondering if any of you have experience of that link with pre-positioning funding in terms of that influence and shaping of community dynamics, and especially in terms of influencing government and the responses. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Anyone would like to respond? Go for it, Tom.
No, I guess for our experience, we finance people affected by disasters, or that we anticipate will be affected by disasters directly. We don't go through local organizations, so maybe do not have as much experience in terms of how prepositioning finance would affect dynamics and the like. If I understood your question correctly, it was about prepositioning finance for, to local organizations for them to actually carry out anticipatory action.
Okay.
Yes, but it's embedded with community groups like disaster risk reduction community groups, so it gave them more voice and empowerment, and I haven't heard that element come out from this conversation, and wondering if you are finding that empowerment element as a factor as well.
I think for individuals, yes, because we identify communities in advance. They are aware that if a trigger is, if it's triggered, then they are likely to receive support. So we see that people are much more confident in the choices that they're making with respect to, for example, what they're doing with their assets, even before the disaster happens. So the issue of empowerment and the certainty of support in case it happens does also give them a certain level of agency with respect to what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I fully agree with you. Money is always a source of solutions, but in some cases it can be a source of conflict. And this is the very risky aspect of the cash transfer, because you really need to put in place some parameters that help you to really reduce the risk that the conflict that money can create in families, but also in societies. But when we are talking about anticipatory action, I never see it only on the aspect of fund, because fund is, as I say, is a solution. But anticipatory action can also consists of looking for the root causes of the vulnerability. And we have a project called VFL in Niger and Chad, and I'm talking about that. So we have understood the main source of vulnerability of these communities. If a community needs a small bridge to make sure that water can easily drain and avoid, kind of flooding, you better provide them that logistic, which is, in my view, also a development dimension, but part of the anticipatory action. And that's something we really need to take into consideration when we plan the humanitarian. So we are not saying no to humanitarian, but we are saying humanitarian that include and mainstream development dimension, not only by providing finance, because finance, it's very risky. You send money to someone in Nigeria and he has, for example, a funeral in his family. Believe me, part of the money will go to the funerals. But when you provide the infrastructure, that will help the whole community to reduce their exposure and their vulnerability to a certain hazard that we know will happen, and we complement that action with the resources, then probably we are providing a sustainable resilience mechanism that communities can rely on in a very long period. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So we have also found that from the research perspective, so we have found that the pre-financing also one of the research we are not doing, but we have to do. That's within the 3 or 4 days, they have used the money in other perspectives. So we need to study on that, the monitoring. within the 2-3 days. And then another perspective, we have found that after the disaster, they don't need any cash support or direct cash support. They need any support in the logistical support, like in any kinds of resource they can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. I think the women at the front. And we'll be here for a bit afterwards if you have any additional questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm Jane Mwichumli Chapa from Malawi. I work with the Churches Action Relief and Development. It's a local NGO. As a local NGO, we are very close to the communities, and we have been implementing anticipatory actions for about 3 years now. And it's not a question per se, but rather a comment that the anticipatory actions, from our experience, we have seen them empowering community to take actions towards climate change. For example, in CAD, we usually build capacity of DRM committees. These are disaster risk management committees, to come up with plans on how they're going to respond to a certain early warning message that they have received. After they come up with the plans, we go through the plans, scrutinize them, and modify them. Then we fund those plans so that they can implement them. So through that, we have seen that we are not only giving them funds to act to the disaster that is coming ahead, but we are also building their skills to mobilize resources for the community towards climate actions. So it's very empowering, because it also gives them that skill to go and search for funds elsewhere apart from the organization that is assisting them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting the how important it is to work directly with communities and how impactful that can be. In the interest of time, I think we will stop it with questions for now, but please come see us afterwards. Before we end, I would like to ask all the panelists for their key advocacy point that they'd like to share after everything you've heard today, starting with Loretta, and then we'll move forward.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think the key message is, as was stated by my colleagues here, anticipatory action is part of a broader disaster risk management strategy that's needed for countries, and do not see it as standalone. If we're not building the resilience of communities to face these recurrent crises, then we're actually doing a disservice. So it's not a one-off, it's part of a larger cycle, and let's not forget the resources and financing needed for that upstream resilience building.
Thank you. I think on my part, going back to what Elisa said when she was summarizing the answer to my question, is the need to consider not only the timing, but the size of the transfers that we're giving when it comes to cash. Because it needs to be enough for them to actually action what they know would be most impactful to mitigate the disaster. That's one point. The second point, I think, just reflecting also from the questions, is that there's a lot that we still need to know with respect to the different interventions that we are implementing. For us, implementing cash that is directed to individuals, also understanding what are some of the community dynamics that can amplify or dilute the impact that we're to see with respect to cash transfers for anticipatory action. So I guess advocacy, also thinking about more research that actually helps us to understand what else is needed for us to make sure that we are supporting these communities most effectively. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. So in my point of view, that I have found that in the anticipatory actions, so how can we work with the whole of society approach? So, you know, the pre, during, and post, and also the policy integration in the government level. So where the different organizations we have found that they are working the pre-level, also the during, also the post, and also that working in the government. So which agency or entity work in the best in this system? So like one under one umbrella, anticipatory action, and they goes to for race to resilience. So thank you.
Thank you so much. My understanding is anticipatory action is a very complex process that need to take into consideration the compounding context, but also take into consideration localization, because once you integrate communities, once you empower them, then probably anticipatory action will have more effect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. For me, I would want to go back with the key message that it's really important, the anticipatory actions should be or must be needs-based. So let us listen and listen and listen to what the communities are saying, the communities want, the communities need, and let us involve them in whatever we want to do. But even after we have done the anticipatory actions, let's not end there. Let's go back and hear from them on what they are saying, what worked, what did not work, and how can we do better next time we are doing or we have a forecasted hazard. So engage, engage, engage for us to have effective anticipatory actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a perfect way to end this panel with the absolute key message that we wanted to share with you today. Thank you to all the excellent panelists. It was great to have you. We're here for questions. If you feel like speaking to us, please feel free. Thank you so much and have an excellent rest of your day. Thank you.